In September 2000, at the headquarters of the United Nations in New York, 149 world leaders made a commitment to profoundly change the world. The leaders gathered to establish a set of worldwide goals that would have to be achieved in a period of 15 years' time, so the lives of billions of citizens across the planet were transformed for the better. This was the birth of the first United Nations Millennium Goals. There were 8 goals in total. 1. To eliminate extreme poverty and hunger. 2. To achieve global primary education. 3. To empower women and promote gender equality. 4. To reduce child mortality. 5. To promote maternal health. 6. To fight malaria, HIV, AIDS, and other diseases. 7. To promote environmental sustainability. And finally, 8. To foster a universal partnership for development. At that time, these massive goals created great expectation and enthusiasm, but 15 years later, that is, in 2015, they were no longer operative. Was because they were reached? No. The United Nations left those goals well behind reach, and for many hundreds of millions of citizens around the world, those critical areas were still the source of suffering and despair. In 2015, the UN assessment regarding these first goals was that despite they had led to many successes, the poorest and most vulnerable people were being left behind. In fact, in that year, 2015, 10% of the world population, that is 800 million, continued to live in absolute poverty. 57 million children of primary school age did not attend school, and those in the poorest households were 4 times more likely to be out of the education system if comparing with the richest ones. The stunted growth, impaired growth and development that children experience from poor nutrition remained a huge problem. According to the UNICEF, 25% of children under 5 years of age, 25% across the world, have stunted growth. About 16,000 children died each day before they reached 5 years of age, mostly due to preventable causes. Every day, almost 1,000 women died from causes related to pregnancy and childbirth. These were preventable causes. 94% of these deaths occurred in the poorest countries of Asia and Africa, but mothers also die at a very young age in Latin America, in the USA, and in other countries as well. Millions of women in many parts of the world continue to face discrimination in accessing economic resources, work, and participation in public and private decision-making, and were more likely to live in poverty if compared to men. Nearly 50% of global workers continue to work in extremely precarious conditions and rarely got to enjoy the fruit associated with decent work. Still in 2015, 2.4 billion people, that is 1 in 3, did not have the most basic sanitation facilities, and almost 900 million were estimated to be living in slum-like conditions in the developing regions worldwide. So this was the situation in 2015. Let's just for a moment go back to 2012. That year, that is 3 years before the deadline for the first 8 Millennium Goals came to an end, the United Nations members decided to prepare and establish a new round of strategic goals to replace the agenda in place and to serve as the next roadmap for world change for the next decade. This was the birth of the new Sustainable Development Goals, and these are the current United Nations goals set to be achieved until its deadline, which is 2030. 9 years until this deadline, how are we progressing? Are we going to reach them in the remaining 9 years' time? To reflect on the most probable answer to this question, let us just take a brief look into the two most basic and fundamental goals, two goals that represent the most fundamental rights that no human being should be deprived of. The right to have their basic needs met, Goal 1, no poverty, and the right to nourish their body, Goal 2, zero hunger. The 2019 data, still according with the United Nations, tell us that the situation is this. Regarding Goal 1, 10% of the world population still live in absolute poverty. The present reference spending for this is below $1.90 a day. This number was set by the World Bank and, by their own words, is the equivalent of the previous reference line, which was $1.25. Note that if $1.90 is the threshold to classify absolute poverty, then this means that if someone lives with $1.92 per day, this person does not live in absolute poverty anymore. This person is simply out of these statistics. Regarding Goal 2, zero hunger, according with the State of Food and Nutrition in the World from 2019, also known as the SOFI report, the number of people suffering from chronic hunger in this year was 821 million, an increase of 10 million over the previous year. That is what we can observe in this map. This means that 1 in 9 people around the world do not get enough to eat. Africa is particularly affected, with 1 in 5 people suffering from hunger. Also, around 2 billion people face some level of food insecurity, and this is what the scale and the different colors on the countries tell us on this map. 2 billion is around 1/3 of the population. 1/3 of the population lives with food insecurity. What is food insecurity, you might ask? Food insecurity means that the food intake of household members is disrupted because they lack the resources to provide the basic food they need. Also, at the end of 2020, an additional 250 million people would have experienced total starvation, according to the World Food Programme, mainly in low and middle-income countries, Africa and the Middle East, essentially, and this due to the effects of violent conflicts, of war, natural catastrophes, and the sudden loss of sources of income thanks to the economic consequence of the pandemic. With this progress in mind, we can wonder, why is the world so far behind these two fundamental rights? Are we going to reach Goal 1, no poverty, and Goal 2, zero hunger, in a 9 years' time? Are we going to reach the 17 United Nations goals in the same period? Or at least, are we going to fulfill half of the targets and indicators set to track their progress? What do you think? Well, I do not think so. The massive failure of the 17 Sustainable Goals is, in my perspective, guaranteed. And this is the tragic truth about this effort that brought together so many good intentions on a global scale. What or who should we blame or demand accountability for? Well, the who blame game is a game that leads nowhere. But there is something with these 17 Sustainable Goals that demands a closer look on what is accountability. As you can conclude if you have watched this video this far, my perspective towards these United Nations Millennium Goals is very critical. Despite all the good intentions, the goodwill, there is something particularly wrong with these 17 global goals. The criticism around these goals is not new, and it has been expressed across the years through commercial articles, scientific papers, institutional blogs, etc., etc. I will summarize it to clarify the grounds of the present reflection. It has been said that these goals are too broad, covering many areas, so they are not achievable in this time frame. It has been said that economic growth, Goal 7, is a double sword. The rich got richer and the poor get poorer. Besides that, it has an impact on the climate and green agenda. It has been said that the emphasis on social issues is limited on these goals. Also, that there are no resources for the government to implement them. It has been said that they are not a mandatory contract. They are inconsistent. Some goals contradict others, for instance, economic growth versus social and environmental concern. They do not address the root causes of the challenges. There has been also ideological-based criticism. The goals reinforce or challenge a neoliberalism agenda. Global corporations are not included in the targets. It has been said that they are difficult to monitor since data is not fully available or not accurate across the different indicators. That is, different countries, developed and developing ones, will provide inconsistent data depending on the quality of their statistical agencies. They are a top-down approach designed by the political elite. And finally, it has been said that these goals will create unnecessary impressions of failure. There has been some improvement across some indicators in the last years. The setting of these new goals creates the impression that nothing of significance has been achieved. So these are, in summary, the main critical observations. Do I agree with all of them? To a certain degree, yes, but not totally, because in my perspective, they do not address the fundamental and structural root causes that throw the world into the systemic crisis that faces for decades. The root causes and chains that held this world in bondage remain unchallenged. The root causes are not part of these goals, and there is a total absence of effective and cohesive strategies and action plans to erase the various sources of all these plagues. This way, we don't get there. What are the sources of absolute poverty? What are the sources of starvation? What are the sources of slavery? The United Nations Millennium Goals have already failed across all their dimensions. This is the truth. Just picture this. Today, 15% of the global population, that is 1.1 billion people, practice open defecation. How is this possible?